Hello everyone. In this video, we are going to see how to convert the REST endpoint what we developed in the previous video into the GraphQL endpoints. Okay, so we need the GraphQL dependency which is needed for the implementation of the GraphQL endpoints which we added already. So we have the GraphQL dependency, so we are good to proceed with the GraphQL endpoint implementation. So we need to understand two things, two keywords in the GraphQL context. The first one is query. The second one is the mutation. The query is related to the fetch operations. I mean the get mapping operation, what we do in the REST endpoint. The other data modification operations such as update the data or creating the new record to the database or deleting the record from the database. I mean put mapping, post mapping, delete mapping. These related operations can be performed with the help of mutations. Okay. So let's go to the controller class first. Students controller. So let's start with the get mapping first. So this get mapping will fetch all the record from the database, right? So here we have the get mapping. So in GraphQL we need to use query mapping annotation. Okay, this query mapping annotation is from the org Spring framework GraphQL data method annotation and query mapping. Okay, so we need to do one more changes. So the GraphQL endpoint doesn't know anything about, so we haven't specified how to invoke this method for fetching all the data from the database, right? So that we have to instruct the GraphQL server through the configuration file. So in the Spring Boot we have application or properties. Similar way in GraphQL we have the schema.graphqls file. Okay, let's create the schema.graphql files. So source main resources, we already have the GraphQL folder. So inside that folder right click new file schema dot graph qls. So we can give any name for the file name. It is not mandatory like the name should be the schema only. We can give a dot schema or foo dot key graphqls, any name we can give for this file, but the file type should be graphqls always. Okay, so click on finish. So as I said earlier, for fetching the data we need to use the query, right? So let's create the query first. So here type query. Okay, and then the query in the sense for fetching the data, right? So go to the controller class and copy the method. So the method name is get all student. Copy the method name, the exact method name. Go to the schema.graphqls file. So here we need to specify the operation name, I mean the method name. Sorry, get all student. Okay, so this method doesn't accept any input, so we can uh, we can uh, we can go ahead and specify the what type of the data it is returning, this method is returning. So it is returning list of student, right? So we need to use the here, square bracket here, student. So it is returning the student object, right? So we need to provide the student object inside the square bracket because it is returning the list of student object. If it is returning only one single student object, then we don't need to specify the square bracket here. Otherwise we need to specify the square bracket. So now we specified the method name and what type of the object it returns, this method is returning. But this GraphQL schema doesn't know what is student object is, right? So we need to define the student object also. That is the second step. So for that, type student, close the bracket, and what are the parameters, what are the variable we declared in the student class? The first one is the roll number. So roll number. What is the type of the roll number? The roll number is the primary key, so we need to specify this as the type of the roll number as id because it's a primary key, right? So it should be id. And the next one is the name, so it is a string, right? So it should be a string. We need to specify the data type actually. Okay, next one is the department also a string. And finally the mark is an integer. Okay, so here we have the integer only. If you want to have a decimal value also, we can keep it here. It will support only the float value, float data type, not the double data type. Okay, so that point we need to be aware of. So okay, now we define the student object, which is the output object, right? Okay, so now we are good to test the endpoint, GraphQL endpoint. Okay, let's restart the server. Okay, if you closely look at the console output, you can see this, right? Loaded one resources in GraphQL schema. It means the schema.graphqls file loaded into the GraphQL server. So the GraphQL server inspected the schema, and also we need to make sure that within this unmapped fields angular bracket there shouldn't be any fields. If you see any fields inside this square bracket, it means it's not mapped. Those fields are not mapped properly, so you need to check why it is not mapped. Okay, so now we are good to test this get all student endpoint. So notice here also this GraphQL is a post endpoint. It's always the post endpoint. So we are posting all the data inside the method body, I mean the request payload, with a post mapping. Okay, so let's test this GraphQL endpoint. There are two ways to test the GraphQL endpoint. One is through the GraphQL browser, another one is to the postman collection. In order to GraphQL endpoint through the GraphQL browser, you need to add a property into the application.properties file. Spring.graphql.graphql.enabled equal to true. By default this value is false. We need to enable that. So in order to enable that, you need to set it as true explicitly, then restart the server. Okay, the server got started. The server started at port number 8081. So open the browser, http localhost 8081 slash GraphQL. Okay, so okay, this is what we are seeing, right? It's not GraphQL, it is GraphQL interface or GraphQL browser or GraphQL tool. Okay, this is what you see initially. So remove everything from this text editor. So here is where we are going to pass the request payload. So as I told earlier, this is the get mapping, right? We are going to fetch the data from the database. So for that, specify the query first. So select the query and give the name for this query operation, my query, and open bracket and close bracket. So what is we need to inside this, we need to specify the name of the method. So what is the name of the method? Get all student. Okay, doesn't have any input parameters to be passed to the method. So open bracket, close bracket. So and then we have to specify what are the fields you want in the response. So I want roll number and then name. Only these two fields I want. Okay, so that's it. Only you need to pass these things in the as a request payload. So this is always a post mapping. Okay, so let's hit this one. Okay, see we got outputs and roll number, name for all three objects. This is what we had it in the student database, right? Ram 1, Ram 2, Siva 3, Varun. If you want to get the department also in the response, just add that is in the request payload. So we can control the response by modifying the request payload, right? So this is why it is more tunable compared to REST endpoint. You don't need to create the separate endpoint. If you want to change the number of fields, or if you want to add the more fields to the response, or if you want to change the fields in the response, then you don't need to make a changes in the server side, I mean in the controller class or the service class. You need to just change the payload, request payload. That is why it's more configurable. Okay, so now I want to see the mark also. Okay, so so now this is working fine. Now let's fetch the students list for the given department name. Okay, so the same step we have to follow for this one also. So go to the controller class, student controller. So remove this one, add a thread of query mapping. So we are passing the parameters, right? So to this method. So for GraphQL, it's not a thread of path variable, it is argument. Okay, this argument is from the org Spring Framework GraphQL data method annotation package. Okay, which is part of the GraphQL dependency. Okay, so also we need to specify this method name in the schema file. So go to schema.graphqls file. So we already have the query defined, right? So inside the query, so copy paste the method name. So we are passing the parameter to this method. So we need to specify that in the method declaration. So department is the variable name, and what is the data type? It is a string, and this method also returning the list of objects. See, this is also returning the list of objects. and get all student also returning the list of object. So the same angular bracket student, it means it returning the list of students, and close the angular bracket. So we already defined the student object in the schema file, so we don't need to specify it again. Okay, so now let's restart the server. Okay, server has been started. So go to the GraphQL browser. So copy this one, go to the GraphQL browser, and we need to, so here we need to specify the parameters, the input parameter, right? So it is named, the name of the input parameter is department. We need to specify the value also here. So triple E. So and then finally, what are the fields we need in the response? So I want name and department. Okay, now let's run this. Okay, we got the output now. So get student by department. So to this method, we pass the triple E as the department name. So we got all the records which is having the department name as a triple E. So we have three records out of three records. The first record and second record, those roll number is 1 and 2, are from triple E, right? So the same response we got it in the output. So if you want to have the one more response, one more field in the response, then add that. You can add that as well. Mark. Okay. So this is the request payload for the GraphQL endpoint. So we specify that query. So the query, in the sense, we are going to perform the fetch operations, and we are naming the query as a my query, and then inside that my query we put that method name what we have it in the schema file, and what are the field we did it in the response. In the same way, for fetching the records from the database for the given department name, we pass the parameter name in the method, and then we specify what are the parameters we need in the response. Okay, so that's all about get mapping or fetch operations. So now we are going to see how to insert the data into the database. I mean the post mapping, how the post mapping can be implemented in the GraphQL. So for that, first go to the controller class. So this is the post mapping. So here you need to specify like mutation mapping. So the so here the annotation what we need to use for post mapping is a mutation mapping. Not only for the post mapping, for put mapping and delete mapping also we need to use the mutation mapping annotation. Okay, so here the parameter, this annotation should be replaced by a threat of argument. You're passing the student object, so it should be changed to argument object. Okay, now go to the schema file. We need to specify the mutation, because so the above one is only for fetch operation. This operation is for inserting the new record into the database, right? It's a post mapping. Any operations for data modification, that should be under the mutations. Okay, so mutation, open bracket, close bracket, and then what is the method name? So the method name is add student. Okay, here we are passing the student object, right? So the parameter name is student, and then the object is the student, and the response object is student, is a single object. Okay, so it should be student. Okay, this will give you the error. I will show you why it is giving you the error. Let me start the service. So okay, the error message is the type student is not an input type but what used as an input type. So in the schema file, so this student object, whatever we specified after this colon, right, it is a return type. So we specified the type as a student already in the GraphQLs file, the schema file, but this is always referring to the data type of the returned object, the output object. So we cannot use the same object for the parameters. So the reason for this error is we are using the same student object as an output as well as the input. This is not the right syntax in the GraphQL. So for the input operation, you need to specify that object inside the input block. Okay, so input equal to student input, open bracket, close bracket, copy the same parameters what you have it in the student type and put it inside the input. Okay, so now let's restart the service again. Cool, service started successfully. So go to the GraphQL browser now. First, we need to specify what type of operation we are going to perform. So it is a mutation operation. So it should be started with mutation, and the name for this block, my mutation, and open bracket, close bracket. So copy that method name, add student. Okay, so we are passing the parameter which is a student object. So student and then we are passing the object, right? So it should start with angular bracket. So the first parameter is the roll number. Let's have the value as 4. Name Saravanan. Saran. Department CSE. Mark 67. Okay, and then specify what are the fields we wanted in the response. I want to see all the fields so that I can check whether this object is got inserted into the table successfully or not. So roll number, name, department, mark. Okay, that's it. Let's run this. Check in the response, we can see all the 4 fields what we specified as the input to this method. So let's check the database also. So the database also we can see that field the value is got inserted successfully. Okay, this is all about the post operations. I mean the post mapping, the equivalent post mapping operation in the GraphQL. Next we are going to see how to do the update operation. I mean the put mapping. Okay, so first go to the controller class, change this put mapping into mutation mapping, and then we are passing the parameters, right? So it should be argument, and copy this method name, go to the schema file. So we are passing the student object, right? So same student input. The return type of the this update student is student. That's it. So let's restart the service. I don't want to mess up with this, so let me delete this add student. So let's test only the update student method now, right? So here we have the first record is ram triple 95. So I want to change the department name. So ram is initially in the triple department, now he changed to CSE department. So for that we need to specify the method name first, which is update student, and then we need to specify the parameters, right? So student open bracket close bracket, because we are specifying the object here. So and then roll number is 1, name ram, department CSE, and then finally mark. What is the mark? 95, right? Okay, let's keep the same value here. Okay, so what are the values I wanted to see in the response? Name and department. That's it. Okay, the data is getting updated successfully. Let's check the database. Okay, ram CSE 95, it got updated successfully. Okay, so the update operation also working fine. So in the controller class, let's add one more method to add the student object with respect to every variables. I mean the roll number. So we are passing the student object, right? As a whole, we are passing the student object to this method. Instead of, I wanted to add the student object by passing the parameters individually, separately, like public student add student by param. So what are the parameters or part of that student object? The first one is the roll number. So integer roll number, and then string name, and then string department, and finally integer mark. Okay, so I need to build the student object here. So this object I'm going to pass it to the service class. Okay, so we need to add the mutation mapping, and then we need to add the arguments for each parameters. Okay, so and then copy this method, go to the schema file. So we need to we are passing the parameters, right? Each parameter is part of the student object, right? Each variable which is part of the student object. So first one is the roll number, which is the integer, and second one is the name, which is string, department, the string, and finally mark, which is integer. Okay, it is written in the student object. That's it. So let's restart the service. There is some syntax error. Oh, sorry. It should be a colon. So, but let's restart the service again. Sorry for the typo. Okay, it started now. Okay, remove this mutation. My mutation. So what is the add student by param? So let me copy that method name from the schema file itself, and then we need to specify all the parameters, right? So roll number 5, name Saravanan, department triple E, mark 99. Okay, open bracket, close bracket, specify the variables or the fields those you wanted in the response. So roll number, name, department. Okay, let's run this. Okay, good. Let's check the database. Okay, Saravanan also got added successfully. So that's all about the GraphQL endpoint implementation. In the next video, we are going to see how to test all these GraphQL endpoints using the Postman client. Okay,